Listen up, because in 1985, a group of cat people from outer space landed on American television and absolutely dominated the toy aisles. I'm talking about ThunderCats, the show that had you begging your parents for that Sword of Omens at every trip to Toys R Us. But here's the thing. By 1987, the toy line was dead. Completely done. Yet somehow, the show kept going for 2 more years. But get this. The real story isn't about the show ending. It's about how a cartoon designed to sell action figures made $40 million, changed the game forever, and then collapsed while still on the air. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire rise and fall of the original ThunderCats. And I'm not just talking about when the final episode aired. I'm talking about the real fall that happened 2 years earlier when the money dried up, but the cameras kept rolling. We're going to answer 3 burning questions. First, how did ThunderCats become one of the biggest toy-driven franchises of the 80s, going toe-to-toe with G.I. Joe and Transformers? Second, why did the toy company pull the plug in 1987 when the show was still successful? And third, why do all the reboots keep failing, even though we all still love this franchise? But first, let me give you some context on just how massive this thing was at its peak. Because if you were a kid in 1986, you already know. ThunderCats was everywhere. Alright, so picture this. It's 1984, and 2 guys named Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass are sitting in a room trying to figure out their next move. Now, you might know these guys from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and all those stop-motion Christmas specials your family still watches every year. But by the mid-80s, they're looking at the landscape and seeing He-Man, Transformers, and G.I. Joe absolutely printing money through this new business model. Make a cartoon, sell the toys, repeat. So they decide to get in the game. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just want to make a show. They wanted to make 130 episodes right out of the gate. That's an insane commitment. Most shows at the time would do 13 episodes, maybe 65 if they were confident. But Rankin and Bass went all in with 130 episodes before a single toy hit the shelves. Why? Because they were playing a completely different game called strip syndication. This meant the show could air 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, giving it maximum exposure. The more kids saw Lion-O and the gang, the more they'd bug their parents for the toys. It was a calculated risk that required massive upfront investment, but if it worked, they'd make a fortune. And here's the kicker. They didn't cheap out on the animation. While shows like He-Man were using limited animation that looked pretty stiff, ThunderCats hired Japanese studios like Topcraft to make it look good. We're talking fluid movement, detailed backgrounds, the works. That Sword of Omens extending? That looked cool. And that quality made all the difference when you were standing in the toy aisle deciding between Lion-O and He-Man. Part 1, The Rise. So here's how the launch went down. And this is crucial to understanding the whole story. In spring of 1985, LJN Toys, the company making the action figures, put the toys in stores before the show even premiered. That's right, the toys came first. The cartoon was literally designed to be a 22-minute commercial for products that were already on shelves. Then, in September 1985, ThunderCats hit syndication, and it was an immediate hit. Kids across America were tuning in every single day to watch Lion-O, Panthro, Cheetara, Tigra, and the rest of the crew battle Mumra on Third Earth. The show had everything. Cool characters, awesome villains, that incredible theme song, and most importantly, it looked better than almost anything else on TV at the time. The creative team was led by a guy named Leonard Starr, who developed the show's Bible and kept everything consistent across all those episodes. And let me tell you, for a show designed to sell toys, ThunderCats actually had some decent storytelling. Sure, every episode had a moral at the end. This was the 80s after all. But the world building was solid, the characters had personality, and Mumra's transformation sequence was legitimately creepy. But the real genius was in the character design. These weren't just generic action heroes. They were humanoid cats with distinct personalities and weapons. Lion-O had the Sword of Omens. Panthro had the nunchucks. Cheetara was fast. Tigra could turn invisible. Each character gave kids a reason to want multiple figures, and LJN knew exactly what they were doing. Now, 1986. That was the year ThunderCats absolutely exploded. We're talking fever pitch levels of success. The toys were flying off the shelves so fast that stores couldn't keep them in stock. If you wanted the Cat's Lair playset or Mum-Ra's Tomb, you better believe you were calling multiple stores or getting on a waiting list. ThunderCats was competing directly with the biggest names in the business. G.I. Joe, Transformers, even He-Man. And it was holding its own. The show was pulling massive ratings, and LJN was expanding the toy line like crazy. We're not just talking action figures here. We're talking board games, lunchboxes, backpacks, clothing, school supplies. If you could slap a ThunderCats logo on it, they did. Marvel Comics even launched a ThunderCats comic book series through their Star imprint, and it was selling well. The franchise had achieved total market saturation. You couldn't walk through a toy store, a department store, or even a grocery store without seeing ThunderCats merchandise somewhere. And here's something wild. Rankin and Bass was so confident in their formula that they immediately launched another show called Silverhawks in 1986, using the exact same production model. It was basically ThunderCats in space, with bird people instead of cat people. And they even used the same creative team, including Leonard Starr. That's how hot this formula was running. But here's the thing about reaching a fever pitch. You can't stay there forever. When you saturate the market completely, when every kid who wants a Lion-O figure already has one, when the Cat's Lair playset is sitting in every bedroom in America, what happens next? Part 2. The Fall. Alright, so this is where the story gets really interesting, because the fall of ThunderCats didn't happen in 1989 when the show ended. It happened in 1987, and most people don't even realize it. In 1987, after only 3 years on the market, LJN Toys made a decision that would kill the franchise. They terminated the action figure line. Just done. They released Series 3 with only 8 new figures, re-released 14 old ones, and didn't make any new playsets. Then they walked away. Now, you might be thinking, wait, the show was still successful, right? Why would they kill the toy line? And that's the brilliant, or brutal, part of the business. LJN didn't pull out because ThunderCats was failing. They pulled out because it wasn't their best performer anymore. See, by 1987, the action figure market was absolutely dominated by Hasbro's G.I. Joe and Transformers, and those shows weren't slowing down. On top of that, LJN had launched a WWF wrestling toy line, and it was outselling ThunderCats. So LJN made a calculated business decision. Get out while the getting's good. They got out while the pot was still warm, as the saying goes, and moved their resources to the wrestling figures. But here's the crazy part. The show was contractually obligated to keep going. Remember that 130 episode commitment from the beginning? They still had seasons 3 and 4 to produce. So for 2 full years, from 1987 to 1989, ThunderCats was on television with no toy line supporting it. No new figures, no new playsets, nothing. Think about that for a second. The entire reason the show existed was to sell toys, and the toys were gone. But the show kept going because of a contract signed years earlier. It's like building a car commercial after the car's been discontinued. The whole thing was running on fumes and pre-sold syndication deals. And it gets even more complicated behind the scenes. Leonard Starr, the head writer who'd been the creative backbone of the show, left after season 2. So now you've got a show that's lost its toy line and its creative leader, but it's still churning out episodes because the contract says so. The animation production also shifted. Season 1 was animated by Topcraft, the studio that made it look so good. But after that, they switched to Pacific Animation Corporation. The quality was still decent, but when you're making 130 episodes, maintaining that initial level of polish across the board is tough. Meanwhile, the business side was getting messy too. Telepictures, the company distributing the show, merged with Lorimar, and then in January 1989, literally the same year the show was ending, Warner Brothers bought the whole thing. So ThunderCats went from being this independent syndicated hit to being owned by a major Hollywood studio right as it was wrapping up. And here's something else happening in 1987 that made things worse. The regulatory environment was turning against toy-driven cartoons. Consumer watchdog groups were going after shows like ThunderCats, calling them soul-suckingly toy-focused. and arguing they were just manipulating kids into begging their parents for merchandise. The FCC was investigating, politicians were getting involved, and even though these shows were ultimately allowed to continue, the controversy made networks and toy companies nervous. So you've got declining toy sales, regulatory pressure, creative turnover, and corporate ownership changes all happening at once. The writing was on the wall. Part 3. The End and Its Legacy. ThunderCats officially ended on September 29, 1989, with an episode called The Book of Omens. And to their credit, they actually gave it a proper ending. The final episode dealt with stabilizing New Thundera and provided some closure to the story. It wasn't just canceled mid-season with a cliffhanger. They fulfilled that 130-episode contract and wrapped it up. But by 1989, the landscape of children's television was changing fast. Shows like Tiny Toon Adventures and Ren and Stimpy were coming in with a completely different style. More self-aware, more creator-driven, less focused on selling toys. The whole syndicated action-adventure model that ThunderCats pioneered was starting to feel dated. The official reason given for the cancellation was that ratings had dropped and the cost of Japanese-style animation wasn't justified anymore. But let's be real. The show had been a zombie for 2 years, stumbling forward without its primary reason for existing. The toy line died in 1987. The show just took 2 more years to catch up. Now here's what's fascinating. ThunderCats never really went away. Those of us who grew up with it in the 80s never forgot it. The vintage toys became collector's items worth serious money. The show lived on through reruns, VHS tapes, and eventually DVD and streaming. ThunderCats maintained this incredible nostalgia factor that kept it alive in pop culture. So naturally, Warner Brothers, who now owned the property, tried to bring it back. In 2011, they launched a reboot on Cartoon Network, and here's the thing, it was actually good. They got Studio 4 degrees Celsius from Japan to animate it, made it more serialized and anime influenced, and critics loved it. Some fans even said it was better than the original. But it got canceled after just 1 season, 26 episodes. Why? Because it didn't sell enough toys, and because Cartoon Network executives decided to bet on Lego's Legends of Chima instead. Sound familiar? Once again, ThunderCats got killed by the business side, not the creative side. Then, in 2020, they tried again with ThunderCats Roar, which was a comedic reboot aimed at younger kids. And, yeah, that didn't really connect with the nostalgic adult fans or the new generation. It was too different, too silly, and it felt like they were trying to make ThunderCats into Teen Titans Go. The problem with all these reboots is that they can't recreate the original formula. The 1985 show had 130 episodes to build its world and characters. The 2011 reboot had 26. Modern production costs make it impossible to commit to that kind of volume up front, and without that volume, you can't build the same kind of cultural presence. Plus, the toy market is completely different now. Kids aren't begging for action figures the way we did in the 80s. They're playing Fortnite and Roblox. The whole business model that made ThunderCats possible doesn't really exist anymore. Part 4. The Real Story. So, here's what the rise and fall of ThunderCats really teaches us. It was never about the quality of the show. ThunderCats succeeded because it was a perfectly engineered product for its time. High-quality animation, daily exposure through strip syndication, and a toy line that hit the market at exactly the right moment. And it fell not because the show got bad or because kids stopped liking it, but because the business model collapsed. LJN pulled out when they had a better opportunity, and without new toys, the whole ecosystem fell apart. The show kept going for 2 more years, purely because of a contract, like a ghost haunting the airwaves. The 130-episode commitment that seemed so brilliant in 1984 became an albatross by 1987. They were legally obligated to keep making a commercial for a product that no longer existed. That's the real story of ThunderCats. It was a victim of its own success and the ruthless economics of the toy industry. And you know what? That makes the whole thing even more impressive. Despite being designed from day one to sell toys, despite being a corporate product through and through, ThunderCats managed to create something that resonated with an entire generation. We didn't care that it was a commercial. We just knew that when that theme song hit and Lion-O held up the Sword of Omens, it was the coolest thing on television. The vintage toys are worth hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars now. The show is still being discovered by new generations through streaming. And every few years, Warner Brothers tries to bring it back because they know the brand still has value. ThunderCats proved that you could make a toy commercial that was actually good, that kids would actually care about. It showed that animation quality mattered, that world building mattered, that characters mattered, even in a show designed purely to move merchandise. So yeah, the toy line died in 1987, and the show ended in 1989. But Thundercats are still out there, living on in our memories, our collections, and our constant hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will figure out how to bring them back the right way. Thanks for watching. But here's the thing. Everything I just told you about Thundercats is part of a bigger story about how the entire toy-driven cartoon industry of the 80s worked and eventually collapsed. So if you want to understand how shows like G.I. Joe, Transformers, and He-Man all followed similar patterns, check out this video where I break down the entire business model that created and destroyed the greatest era of action figures. Trust me, once you see how the whole system worked, you'll never look at your childhood the same way.